Felix Chan, welcome to this episode of Fireside Chats. How are you?
Thank you, Martin. It's very good to be here. I appreciate the time.
I'm very happy that we're both standing up for this conversation, which is always a good start. Keep the blood flowing.
Exactly.
Uh, so, look, for the benefit of the audience, would love if you wouldn't mind giving me a bit of background on yourself, a bit of your work history and how you ended up in the value practice space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I may have had a little unorthodox way of coming into business value. So I started my career in technology or tech sales as an SDR, and that led me to being part of the enablement team, believe it or not, for about 3 to 4 years. The enablement leader that I worked with at my previous company became the VP of the enablement here at Ping, where I am currently. She's now since gone, but when she came over to Ping, she kind of brought me over, and I spent another 2, 3-ish years as an enablement person at Ping. During that time, we had our value director start at Ping, and he and I started maybe a couple of weeks apart. So throughout the transition, everybody has stories from COVID. He and I started both right around COVID. And I think, maybe as a product of just being in the trenches, being in that time together, but he and I worked very, very closely, throughout that time. And about a year and a half, almost 2 years now, a position opened up on his team. And, he's asked me before, maybe I just wasn't mentally ready, but then he asked me again about 2 years ago. And I think, something just stuck, something just resonated. And here I am.
What would you say are the biggest changes from going from a sales enablement role into a value engineering, value consulting role?
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit for me is, being an enablement is a lot more of an internal resource, back office type of function, which is great. I had the opportunity to, right, my whole job was to go out and understand from the sales reps, what the best practices were, what did they do great, how do they, do discovery, how do they pitch, how did, all these great things, and being able to synthesize it and spit it back out in a way that is consumable for the rest of the go-to-market team. The piece I think that was missing for me is, I did these secondhand and not firsthand. And being in the value practice right now, it just gives me the ability to exercise a lot of those muscles and doing it directly with customers. So being customer facing, I think, is a big part of it. I think the muscles of synthesizing a lot of different things and points and try to connect the dots and make it is really the foundation of how I approach this job in general. But long way to answer your question, the biggest thing I think is just being customer facing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because obviously you came from a very different area within sales, but a completely different area within a business. What were your perceptions of the value practice or value services when you were when you were in an enablement space, and how have
Yeah.
they changed obviously since you've started working in that space?
Yeah, I've always had great respect for the value space. At my previous company, we had a value team as well. And here at Ping, I was around when the value practice was first created. I think how I was introduced into technology and software sales in general, a lot of the trainings I got early on were very value focused, and I think that just molded me to think in that way. As opposed to, a lot of times, it's very easy to think product first. I was always just, trained, and I think that just led me a path of thinking, okay, what's the value first before getting to the product? So I've always had great respect, and everything that came out of, both practices that came out was always interesting to me. I know my boss now, or, even before when we were peers, we would have a lot of more theoretical conversations of what value meant, and how do we apply it to certain things that we're doing from an enablement perspective and what he's doing from a value practice perspective. And I always found it interesting, the value practice, that we can look at any opportunity or sales cycle or just conversation with customers in a different way, and we have a path that we go on, that to me just is, one, a little bit more difficult, but two, also just more interesting in our ability or my curiosity to just understand our customer's business and how business translates. and turning that into, whatever that we put in front of them and seeing if we can tell the story. I think the storytelling aspect of it has always been a draw to me, and now being able to do it, it has just, has been a good time.
And how repeatable is it as a process? Because what I mean by that is you talk a lot about, it feels like it's quite a custom experience every time with every new customer. You need to, there's a story that's specific, unique to that customer or that prospect. There's value, there's a value story. How much of the process is baked versus how much of it is custom on a per prospect basis?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a fine balance. I think when I think about repeatable, I do think maybe it's either the top level stuff and the bottom level stuff. And what I mean by that is, repeatable in terms of top level is thinking through how to approach things. So whether it be how
Hmm.
to do research for the customer, how to think through, the type of discovery that I want to try to lead. It could be as very tactical as, okay, when a rep gets me engaged, I want to have a good understanding of what the opportunity is. So I need to know what to ask of the rep before I get engaged into a deal. So it could be that top level stuff. Bottom level stuff in terms of repeatability, it could be, when we build things for a certain product or service that we have, at least the use cases or the value propositions can be repeatable. It has to be customized for the customer and whatever the situation may
Sure.
be. Kind of shortcutting some of that so we can just, kind of recycle or iterate on the things that we've already built. But when I think, the most interesting part of the job is everything in the middle, and that's the customization piece. That's getting in, being curious with the customer. That's trying to understand what's happening. We have product and services that we know we fit certain use cases or pains or challenges, but within each customer, that pain or challenge manifests itself a little bit differently. And
For
getting
sure.
getting into those nuances is the interesting part of the job, right? So that's how I approach it. I try to sit as much at the middle as possible because I think that's where a lot of the learnings actually come from.
And imagine the more curious, the more innately curious someone is, the better they are at the job, right? If you marry innate curiosity and business acumen, you should have a pretty good value engineer.
Yeah, and I'm on the side. I know a lot of, sometimes practices where people just ask us like, okay, we're getting into this conversation. What questions do we ask? Like, how do we discover towards this? And
Hmm.
we provide those, and I do my
Tricky
best job.
strength.
That Yeah, but I always just, try to take a pause. It's like, we can give you prompted questions, but it usually doesn't flow in a conversation just
Of
because when it
course.
a conversation is not so much like a question firing. Um, so, we do our best to enable on that, but the curiosity I think is the most important piece.
And is it something that you try to train into the sales reps? Because I imagine, the value practice, people like you are a very scarce, dear resource in an organization that tend to be rightfully so applied to some of the larger strategic deals. Then there's a whole part of the pipeline, the segment, mid-market, maybe smaller enterprise, where
Yeah.
it's just not a scalable enough practice. How do you make up for that? Is it something that you support, train? Coming from enablement, you must have also a training mentality to help train this into reps.
Yeah, I think that's always the tricky part. There's always the balance that has to be created. I will say I do think it's interesting. I do think it's a benefit for the organization that here at Ping at least, the enablement lead was the one who started the value practice. And so even still to this day,
Yeah, that's
value
great.
sits under
Yeah.
the enablement umbrella, right? Um, and that I think gives the opportunity for our team to be pushed a little bit more on thinking on the training, the scalability. We manage the in-house, value calculator. So that's something that the entire go-to-market team can use. Certainly, it's an out-of-the-box tool for the most part. So to the level of depth that we can go in there and do customization, most reps can't get out of the tool, but it is a great start.
I've got
Uh,
something for that, but we can talk about that another time.
exactly.
Don't worry.
We get pushed a little bit more into kind of the training aspects of it. Like, kickoff, our whole team had to do a presentation. Any sort of round of new hire boot camps, we get pushed out there and we have sessions there. So it's difficult in the sense where we can't be everywhere. In
Mm.
terms of our impact, we have to be aligned to the most impactful deals throughout the year. And we try to support where we can. But us being pushed from an enablement side to do more trainings is how we, do our best to try to serve the rest of the go-to-market team.
And just out of curiosity, is this role is part of your KPI as a role linked to some sort of an attach rate on deals? Is there some sort of a connection based on number of deals won? How does a success get measured for the value practice?
We, as a full go-to-market team, so we have our sales reps, and then we have, what we call a pod here. And I think a lot of the rest of the pod is just driven towards new ARR. That's just how
Makes
our
sense.
organization
Sure.
goes. But internally, and how we think about kind of leading and lagging indicators, if you will, we call what, when we get into an actual deal and do any sort of custom work or manage or work with reps in the actual deal, speak with the customer, we call those white glove engagements. And we do track the amount of white glove engagements that we have. And as we're progressing throughout the deal, if regions or deals are low in these white glove engagements, or if there is the biggest deal of the year and we don't have some sort of attachment to that, that starts to tell us like, okay, how are we doing everything that we can to maximize and make sure that we're
Yeah.
closing these deals? So we track those internally, but as a group, we're purely just looking at new AR.
Yeah, makes sense. It's what you would I guess the number one target. It's all about growth.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting because we talked a little bit about the innate curiosity and the need to be able to, John McMahon talks about it in Qualified Sales Leader, right? Talks about leading the witness, right? A good lawyer will lead the witness towards a direction that they want, and a good value seller, a good value person will be able to lead their buyer. And it's not about guiding them towards, extracting as much value from them. It's about enabling them to actually buy your product better, right? Because a lot of this space today, buying is complex. The more complex the software, the more complex the purchase. And oftentimes, the person buying your solution, your champion, may be the first time they bought your category, right? And so there's a real need to really drive buyer enablement, getting your buyer to buy better. I'd love your perspective on the role of value, of the value practice in almost being a neutral support for
Yeah.
the buyer as opposed to just a companion of the salesperson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tee it up. Most sales reps are used to having a technical resource kind of sit alongside them. And I
Sure.
think a lot of when they have good discovery, there is a separation of duties almost where the rep can do a lot of the more sales types of discovery and the technical resource can do a lot more the technical discovery. I think it's the same thing from a business value perspective. I'm always in the conversation and approaching, okay, like what does this actually mean for you as an organization? And sometimes the answer comes back and I'd be honest with the rep, like, hey, you know, we're trying to sell them this big thing, but it doesn't seem like the problem's that big, or we haven't understood if the problem is big enough.
So you're
Yeah.
helping qualify, right? Like midway through the deal, you could qualify and say, this isn't really a deal that is worthwhile, or it's not as big as you may think it is.
Yeah. Every salesperson wants to make money. So when they have an opportunity in front of them, they're like, yeah, I got to go chase it. It could be two parts. It could be one,
Mm.
we just don't see this pain as being that big of a problem. Or two is like, we don't really understand what the pain is just yet. And we got to dig deeper. And I think the leaders are on the side of this as well. Is, a lot of times we go into this long deal cycle and, they ask their reps the questions like, okay, what actual pain are we solving? What are we driving? What type of business impact are we having? And then they give something answer where it's capability focused, product focused, and, we haven't asked a larger question. So that's really the area I think where I come in and try to push the teams.
He says, and I do love that idea that you're always qualifying, right? A deal shouldn't just be qualified in qualification. And there's that level, that filter, the reality filter that comes from effectively an internal consultant, right? A value consultant to assess, is the pain big enough, or is the value big enough? Are they going to be able to, is there a compelling enough event for them to buy today versus kick the can down the road? It's a really good sanity check. And I wonder if that happens during pipeline forecasting, if there is that additional layer of reality checking coming from the consulting side
Yeah,
or your
there's
value side.
yeah, we use MedPick here at Ping. So the tactical thing that leadership asks of the reps is, have you spoken to Felix about getting SEM twos? Right?
Perfect.
It's about understanding, like, okay, whatever opportunity that we have in front of them, like, how are we measuring the actual business impact? So I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is, just with buying cycles in general now, we're in technology, so we typically sit within the IT space. Those IT folks have to speak to business leaders on how to sell their project and get money. And a lot of the cases, IT folks don't know how to speak that language. So, using us as a resource to help guide, our IT champions in order to tell that story.
Interesting. I spoke yesterday, had another fireside chat yesterday with a gentleman called Roy Schuster, who is ex Cisco. Now he's at Infoblox. He
Yeah.
said the exact same thing, that ability for the consultant to support in translating the outcomes from a technology outcome into a business outcome, effectively helping your champion advocate and speak the language of their economic buyer, is such a critical part of this role.
Yeah. And I'm certainly not going to come from a perspective like I know it all. What I can try to do is at least open the eyes and broaden the scope. So, like, one quick example, the other day, very commonly current customers, I think, asked if, like, hey, we're trying to do this thing. Do you have any, quick generalized materials on how you help other customers? Any sort of market data that we can use? And a rep kind of reached out to me, was like, hey, do we have anything like this? And I said, well, okay, so they're a current customer. And I asked him directly, well, do we know what value that they see in front of our product today? And he was like, I don't know. I don't think so. And, getting into the call with the customer, I sort of open it up with, and try to understand, have you able to quantify and measure the impact that you're having today? They've been live for a few years now. And, they said very directly, like, yeah, it's a good point. We haven't actually gone back and really understood, how Ping has helped us. And so coming out of that call, the steps was, how do we help measure the success within the story? I think when we think about customer stories, this one is the one within. If we can use the success at the customer to sell more projects
Sure.
to as a business, I think it's the greatest thing. And, those are opportunities, I try to push the team to really, kind of listen out for.
Yeah, and it's exactly it, right? Because value isn't just pre-sale. On the contrary, right? There's a whole value delivery piece, value realization that's so critical for everything, not just renewals, but for internal insights and for being able to execute the whole value motion, value experience across the organization. I
Exactly.
say value is a team sport, right? It goes from the SDR all the way through to customer success and product as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so going back on the innate curiosity or the whole discovery piece, there's a lot of, with AI technology today, one would think that is an area that could help to standardize the process. What has been your experience with, because I can imagine there's elements here, of course, that you can automate, but
Yeah.
if we're talking to natural, you can't just, AI is not going to naturally identify opportunities and have that innate, at least not today, that level of curiosity and accuracy. So I'd love your perspective on how tooling may or may not help in this scenario.
I think that's exactly it. My perspective on AI is an absolutely amazing tool. I use it every day, right? I think where AI is powerful is to, just like Google, like when you need to have an answer for something specific, that's where AI gets
Hmm.
placed in. But to me, AI is not a replacement for curiosity. So meaning, if I'm doing account research, I can look up, okay, what is the business of this and what do they care about. And AI will spit something out and it's very succinct. It's very straightforward. To me, that does not provide the context that I need in order to be, or in order to try to be really educated over going into the annual report and reading the whole business section and really understanding how the nuances work and how do they describe their business lines and what that actually means from an actual operations perspective, right? AI spitting that out doesn't give me that context, and understanding that context is where our differentiation as a
Mm.
value really comes into play. On the flip side, if I'm reading something I don't understand, I can put it into a chat GPT. It's like, okay, that's what that means.
Yeah.
Okay. I and I think that for that use case, AI is absolutely powerful. So, it's certainly an enabler of us trying to get to the information faster. And I think with how fast technology is and the way, the technology landscape is shaping up, like I think since the birth of Google, we're just used to punching in a question and getting an answer. I do feel like, it can be a crutch because we lose insight into kind of nuances that really make our ability to understand our customers better. And, we just got to be able to understand that balance in order to kind of find the right path.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a lot of people do think that it's this magic bullet that will help them solve everything. Just apply AI to it. But
Yeah.
there's things that you can automate. There's processes you can automate, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but the like I said, the genuine innate curiosity that comes from connecting a lot of random dots that may seem random, that is very difficult to train models on. We're still far away from that, especially when in helping reps guide through a series of questions. I think you can give a discovery guide, of course, but and you'll probably get the reps that hit 70% of their quota will probably follow that guide well. The ones that hit 100 or exceed their quota, they don't need a guide. They know exactly how to naturally engage through empathy, curiosity, and business acumen. And that's very difficult to replicate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious from your perspective. You speak to a lot of folks, both on the value side as well as I'm sure sales folks. Where do you see best use cases with things like AI and things like ChatGPT, Gemini, all that kind of good stuff?
So from our perspective with Simbi, where we're finding a lot of value is in generating through all the context, through all the data, through the M1s and the initial M1s and an assessment of what the M2s could be. In Medic, for instance, you can build a value hypothesis with AI.
Yep.
And the good thing about it, and the benefit of that is it can be used in the qualification phase. A lot of people think that a business case is a closing tool. It's that thing that you write because your champion said, I need to get this over the line. Help me write a business case. That's the worst time, or it's very reactionary, right? Whereas if you start with the business case, kind of like starting with the end in mind, but you start it with a hypothesis in qualification, as early as qualification, you can use that as a way to say, look, we've done a bit of a hypothesis. This is a value we think we can bring you, but help us validate these numbers. You're quickly qualifying if there's an opportunity. With the business case, you're then guiding naturally into a discovery. And that then becomes a common thread throughout the whole cycle, because then you can approach even your demo. When you get to a demo, you'd already know what the problems are. So you can connect the value to the demo, right? And so it becomes a very natural tool. And so from going back to your point, from an AI perspective, what AI should be doing, at least from our perspective, it is doing, it's helping to build that value hypothesis in seconds. So the rep doesn't need to do that. But equally, as the rep continues through discovery, it listens to how the challenges are being expressed, and it automates the updates of that business case in a way that is completely in tune with the way that the rep is guiding that conversation, equally the response that they're getting. And so you should get to something quite automated, but it's not a robot, right? It's not build me, start and sign me a contract. Yeah, done, right? It's just not going to happen like that, right?
That's very interesting because I know at least amongst the value team, I'm sure many in the industry, it's a lot of this front loaded
Yes, TR
discovery.
piece.
Yeah, this front loaded aspect of it where, when a rep comes to us and they say, okay, I have this deal with this product, and we ask them like, okay, what are use case, what are the problems? They're unable to give a real
Hmm.
succinct answer, right? So it makes a lot of sense that it's feeding something like Simbi to kind of provide at least guidance based on all the notes that you guys are collating. So
And
that makes
and then
sense.
ultimately, all the material that comes off the back of that
Yeah.
should you could automate all of that, right? Of course, but that's your table stake Gen AI. You could write an executive summary. You save the rep 2 days or a week. Equally, if it's developed for the champion, right? Because a business case is it's never ours; it's our champions, right? It's something that should be provided to them to help them make the case. And so there's a lot that can be automated, but the nuts and bolts, the discovery, you can always provide a guide, but you need to enable that conversation to happen, and you need that kind of balance. And ultimately, from our perspective, the role of the value of the value engineer, value consultant, value professional, that is impossible to replace because the depth of analysis, the depth of insight, um, that enables the the kind of the value models to be established for the rest of the organization. And then we apply those models into Simbi, for instance, to enable that kind of approach for the entire pipeline, right? So that mid-market can also value sell without feeling like they need to sacrifice pipeline.
I'm glad you say that because I like to keep doing what I'm doing for a little longer. I'm hoping.
We're not taking a job.
Yeah.
No, because that, and that's the point, right? Like this is
Yeah.
the value practice is the analytical strategic part that always requires continuous evolution and thought, reasoning, understanding, and that's at least today AI is not in a position to come close to replacing that or competing with it.
Yeah, I joke, but I think, maybe even outside of the value practice or in general, right? I think it's just a common thought that AI can automate a lot of processes and tasks, but keeping the skill and knowing how to develop that skill is something that's transferable and hopefully will keep you around for a little while longer. So that's how I think that's how I approach everything. Even AI, even though it spits back out answers, it's a skill in how to use the AI. And any other sort of tool like Simbi as well.
Are you using any AI tools for the research side? So I know a couple of there's salesmotion.io. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, but they're very good at kind of uh, at at distilling a lot of the pre-discovery
Mhm.
insights that you may gather for at least publicly listed businesses, right?
Yeah, we had a tool last year. I don't know if you're familiar with Databook.
No, I haven't seen them.
It less on account research in terms of their technology, more account research in the sense where they pull, it and this was both its benefit and its weakness. It only really was applicable for publicly traded companies because it pulled a lot of the
Exactly.
annual reports, earnings, all that kind of stuff into a report that spits it back out to you. The information was good. Um, but even right now, we don't have it this year. So I'm running a pilot right now to, help reps do some of that research, and an automated tool can spit out the financial findings and give a direction of, where they are weak, whether a revenue perspective and profit perspective, a cost perspective. I think taking whatever analysis that is and drilling down to, okay, how do we actually help them with their products and services? That those two points and understanding how to get there is the skill. So that's where I'm focused on this year.
Yeah, look, AI. It wasn't me that said it. I think it was from the Revenue Builders podcast.
Mm.
In one of the episodes, they talked a little about the impact of AI, and I'm not sure if it is John Kaplan or John McMahon that said that AI will ultimately make the good reps better and the bad reps worse, right? Because it's a tool that can enable you, but it's also a tool that can make you a little bit lazy in your approach. It's all about how you apply it, right?
Absolutely. I'll look into that. I have been in this pilot of account research. I have been enjoying just diving into account annual reports. I think uh,
You like doing the old school research.
maybe that makes me a nerd in a good way. But
Yeah.
the point I was speaking earlier, I think reading the actual, you know, guidance from the organization just gives a lot more perspective into what the business actually is. And it allows me to
Mm,
come up with at least a hypothesis, and I can validate some of that through, Google or ChatGPT or whatever the case may be. But we're in a space of identity, and it's very interlocking with not just the business speaking to the consumers, but it's business speaking to other businesses, businesses speaking to partners. Um, and reading that just gives me a lot more of the nuance I think is
for sure.
beneficial or I approach it. So
It's a really good point though, because a lot of the automation, the snippets or the digest that you may get from some of these tools, you lose the nuance, and ultimately the nuance is what's going to really make you stand out when you're presenting to somebody who's on the inside and they understand the nuance because they get it fed from the very top, versus having just read an article provided to you through some sort of a digest. So that's a really good point, Felix. This really really cool. Well, look, I do have two more questions for you. The first one is, it might not to put you on the spot, but who would be the best value professional you've ever worked with? Either a mentor or a peer.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I've had exposure to a lot, but I feel like I'm lucky to have the exposure have had with the ones that I currently work with. And I think my boss now, one who brought me into the value practice, to me, has been the best one. We sometimes jokingly make fun of him that he itself is like an AI bot. He just seems to be a wealth of knowledge. He's been around in a lot of different spaces, so he has a lot of interesting perspectives. And every time I go to him, he'll give me a thoughtful answer, or we'll have a discussion of why I'm thinking this way and why he's thinking this way. And I think him challenging me in the way I'm thinking and me challenging him in the way I think is just a productive conversation we always have. But leaving conversations with him, I always think about things in a new way. And to me, that is a signal of a very productive, believable person.
Hmm.
I'm reading this book on Ray Dalio about believability and believable people, and that just comes with experience, comes with insight, comes with an approach to being open minded. And I think he has all that.
What's his name so we can shout out on LinkedIn?
Vikas Mandata, he's my
Ah,
boss, right?
Vikas, of course.
Yeah, but Vikas, the senior director of business value at Ping
Amazing,
Identity. Yeah.
brilliant. And equally, in terms of great sales reps that you've worked with, who would you recommend? Who would you say is top?
Yeah, a gentleman I worked with at my previous company, and I still have conversations with him today. He has a perspective on storytelling that I think is really outside the box and makes you think about things in a much larger perspective than um, I've ever, and just lets me broaden the way I think about these things. We've actually he had his own practice at one point. Now he's kind of back in the corporate world, but he had his own practice at one point. And when I was in enablement, we brought him back to do training for our sales folks. And his approach to the types of things he asks his customers, how he asks them, why he's asking them, and ultimately the outcome that he's trying to drive. Not even dabbing into all the numbers, just the way he really really is showing empathy for his customer is something that I admire.
What's this mystery man's name?
Uh, Rob Polina. I've shot him out a couple of things I've done. His name is Rob Polina.
Probably not. Great. Well, I'm sure he'll appreciate the shout out. Felix, thank you very much. Really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did.
Martin, I appreciate the time, appreciate you reaching out, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.